Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back. About plants and prayers. Plants are just catalysts that you utilize to enforce an intent. Each plant that you see outside, whether they sprout their essence in form of flowers. In certain Western cultures, flowers are called the light of a plant. And during certain times of the year where that light of the plant shines outward, it's the point where the strength, spiritual strength of that plant is the strongest. These plants that you see, each and every one of them, have a certain essence attached to them based on an intent. Each plant is just life attempting to express itself based on a thought. If you have a thought, you can consecrate those same thought with each plant to make ends meet. These plants are tools, and prayer is the way that you exercise these tools. So quite often when you start to really get into how spirituality works, outside of child's play, you will gradually begin to see that plants and its use, either through suffumigation, incense, that is, or through taking showers with it, or mixing it with your soap, or mixing it into your perfume, or mixing it into your lotion, or simply keeping them around and so forth, play a huge role in quickening one's ability to exercise certain thoughts and intent. The wise men and women back in the day knew that certain plants correspond with certain intents. That's the reason why they will find whatever flower matches a woman's horoscope and give it to her. But usually when a man gives a woman a flower, it is usually advised that you have her. Regarding prayers, prayer is the forecast to event. It's not a request of a conclusion such as, I want money, or love, or success. Prayer is the psychic phenomenon that basically measures through increasing probability of the desired outcome. In other words, the more you entertain something, the higher the chances of it existing. And prayers are designated moments in reality, whether you want to call it meditation, affirmation, but we'll just, for the sake of encompassing everyone else, we'll just use that term prayer. It is something very psychic, because it occurs in the mind. It's a way of walking from the goal to where you are now, pulling it slowly. Think of a frame of reality that you're currently in, and another frame of your desired outcome, and you have a rope to it, and you're pulling it until that frame of desired outcome merges with your current condition. That's what prayer is. And in order for prayer to work, you must consciously resist worry, hurry, and fear, lack of patience, hesitation. People have been hijacked to think that spirituality is the same as making empty assertions and simply licking the part and speaking the part without actual function and proof of the truth behind what they claim. Many people dedicate each Sundays of their lives to praying over and over to no avail. Many people dedicate Fridays to praying and praying to no avail. And it does nothing. It makes no change. This is because of how they've established relationship with those spiritual acts they're engaging in. Again, with the experience of copulation, someone can engage in it all day, every day. But that doesn't mean they actually know how to actually feel compassion. That doesn't really mean that they actually know how to connect with that other human being. They're just going through the motion of it. It would be good for them, and they would actually appreciate the true connection and the true experience, the deep experience of it. But based on their initial conditioning and programming of their body and their mind, when it comes to copulation, they don't know what it's really supposed to feel like. The same thing applies with spirituality. Most people actually don't know what spirituality is supposed to look like and function, beyond repeating what they've seen someone do. It's easy, especially in the 21st century, to assert that One is spiritual, based on the lingo and the looks. But if you were to ask anyone who asserts spirituality, if you were to ask them to name 3 plants with affinity, for instance, to Saturn, and or even people who claim to know about horoscope, tell them to name 3 separate plants with affinity to Saturn, not just loosely to say, okay, Azalea, Consecration, Gemini, all that. No. What do you use them for relating to those planets? Or how one can actually circumvent the picking of a plant after sunset, or even at midnight, or why one would even need to pick a plant at midnight at all. Or ask them the reason why you place coins and things of value next to plants before picking the plant, beyond merely asking the plant for permission. Those people speaking of spirituality just to sound and look the part will all keep quiet. Spirituality ought not to be that way for you, if you're listening to this. So, as they say, let me put you on some game. Since we know better here, we might as well enlighten one another in the true sense of the word. First, know that plants do go to rest, just like humans. And in order for you to wake up a plant, without direct activities or the direct rays of sun, one can mix. In other words, if you want to engage in an opposite attribute of something in a spiritual work, pick them while they're asleep. But what if it's an emergency and you want them awake even at night, and the work needs to be done at night, and the access is during that time of the day that's at night, but you don't want it to be the reverse effect? Then the solution has been explained. Second is the reason why coins and things of value are placed next to plants. Permission is not the reason why, contrary to what you would readily find people express to you. Things of value are placed by plants before the plant is picked up, because each time you nip that stem or leaf from the ground, it loses its source of water, and by the time you get home, the spirit of that plant have left that plant that you have in your hand. No different than the spirit of a body leaves it and looks different. While for plants, they wither when the spirit and them leave. Remember, nothing dies, because even in death, the physical structure still changes. So evidence of some form of life is there, as corpse change forms also. So we are not asserting that the plant has died, but the spirit simply leaves the plant. And when a spirit leaves something, the influence consecrated to it by nature's law also leaves, because the spirit is what animates and brings to life certain personality and attribute of anything it's attached to. When the spirit of a rose plant leaves it, the physical evidence is that it withers. So you can use it all you want for spiritual work. It does no good. But you can still use it for medicinal purpose, like using the leftover chlorophyll and oils and things like that. But if you want to send the spirit of that plant from point A to point B, one is deceiving themselves if they think a withered plant would do it. Which brings us to why you place items next to plants prior to picking them. There's a very common thing explained to those who go through rites of passage into adulthood, whether male or female, and it is that when things of value are placed next to plants, it is like you knocking on a door or tapping a friend on the shoulder. So you must call the name of that plant and actually tell it that you want its spirit to follow you where you're taking it, long after you've separated it from the rest of its roots or leaf system. You're meant to talk to the plant. See all those trees and shrubs and weeds and vines that people walk around or step on? All those are alive. Not in the sense that they're changing form and increasing according to bias for physical evidence, but they're alive in that they're looking at you. They're listening to you. No different than your neighbor stares at you as you walk by. Now imagine all the millions of plants you've walked by your entire life. That is the same as a million people witnessing your daily activities. Don't assume for a moment that because the form of expression of sight and communication you're familiar with, it's just the limitation of sight, speech, and perception. These plants are always listening. Everything is active and alive. That coin is based on the law of equivalent exchange. For the spirit of the plant to actually follow you back home, despite the physical vessel, which is the part of the stem or the root dwindling and withering with each second and each step you take. That's the secret behind placing an object next to plants you're picking. Because money is currency. And everything you touch, if you were to use some type of machine that observes the heat wave from a human body, you will notice that your heat wave is left in that coin. As that coin comes in contact with the soil or that plant itself, it receives your intent. And thus, you've knocked on its door. You've tapped it on the shoulder. Because now your own electromagnetic field, call it aura or whatever it is, that is attached to that coin that just physically came in contact with the essence, the negative ion of those soil, you've introduced yourself to it by that way. And also, if you were to take that same coin, you can exchange it for something else in this world that you and I live in. The spiritual essence of that equivalence value is taken in by the spirit that worked with these plants, which opens the door for you to now begin to talk to them. Living the item is not it. That's just you knocking on the door. But when you knock on the door and someone says, "Who's there?" and you just keep quiet, after a while, they're going to just ignore you. Leave the item there, then begin to speak to it, the spirit of that plant, that as you separate it from its source of physical life, which is water and sunlight, that you want that spirit to come and follow you, to engage in a specific intent. See, if you've ever watched movies and things like that, and they show you some magnificent fairies floating in the air, and they try to tell you it's in some other land or some other world, and plants are for everyone to use. We can't say theological texts did not tell us. In all these religious books, they tell you that the divine creator has made all the plants and animals on earth for man to use, that we are the Lord of the land. So irrespective of cultures, knowing how these basics works is what you should know if you consider yourself an adult who has some spiritual capacity to some extent. Plants that are placed next to churches and mosques are not placed there by accidents. Plants that are placed next to lodges are not placed there by accidents. In fact, if you really want to know the spirit or the patron spirit to any lodge or any shrine or any cathedral, look at the plants and planet are the same thing. The only letter that separates those two when it comes to what you're readily observing is the letter E. Take the E away from planets and you have plants. This is the reason why the sages of the past know that certain planets correspond to certain planets. Because the heat wave and the vibratory essence of sound that these planets make, when it reaches Earth, it causes the soil to behave a certain way. And the way that those heat wave and energy wave of those planets are communicating with Earth, they express themselves through plants. Plants are the physical manifestation of the vibration of the different planets within our solar system that's constantly hitting Earth. Therefore, you can directly access the essence of something thousands of miles away, right here, next to your bike trail, right there next to the hill somewhere down the street, or maybe in your backyard, that weed growing that you're stepping on, that you're putting chemicals on yearly, but grows back the next year. The reason why you can't really kill plants is because there's so much forces out there that's causing it to persist, regardless of how humans are persistent in their own ways, out of ignorance. Put it to use. That's what you're supposed to do with these plants. For instance, there's a plant with a botanical name called verdolaga. This plant right here. In Yoruba, we call it ewe pakpasan. This specific plant is consecrated to Venus, and it's used when someone owes money and they're looking for a way to repay it. If you mix it, prayers should never be done in a form of request. It shouldn't be done in the form of a demand either, because the higher powers will not submit to the lower. If you're living in a third dimensional, fourth dimensional realm, You are in the lower realms, make no mistake. And there's so much vast energy out here beyond what people can comprehend and what we call dimension that we cannot compel it. We have to consecrate ourselves to it. That's the reason why plants exist as a gift on earth for us. But if you don't even know how to call into the spirit of that plant, or why you're doing certain things, before you get to the point of prayer, you're just going through the rigmarole of looking the part, playing the part, but nothing is really being done. Most importantly, beyond those principles behind prayer and plants is this. Always know that consciousness has a tendency to expand until it is one with all creation. Consciousness has a tendency to always expand until it is one with all creation. That is a very important rule when it comes to spirit work, at least as I was taught. This is where elliptic nature of dark work always come back to you, one way or another, even where measures are taken to drastically reduce said cyclical effect. There are centers of forces that attract matter in atoms of its own like. Like always attract like. So if you do dark work, know for a fact that as you're emitting and expanding that essence within that dark work, you yourself are the center that other dark works will be pulled to. Just a caveat, because everything is elliptic, and nature always does its best to attract and expand to its own type. It always does its best to seek and relate more to itself in a repetitive manner. If what you've consecrated yourself to is a certain essence, that's all that's constantly going to come to you. Albeit most people need to shed off certain things first. And that can also be done with true, actual spiritual baths. A good spiritual bath you can do to shed off malice and feud and misfortune is with something called a jump seed. I mentioned it before. It usually has its seed at the top of it and the plant's closer to the bottom. It's a very thin little stem that comes out of it. Right here. This is what the top of it will look like. The entire plant will usually look like this. This plant is a type of knotweed that's consecrated to Saturn. If you take the leaves of this plant, blend it, the truth is we are all one because we are all of the same source. And because of this, there will always be elements of familiarity because we all come from the same source. So when a corresponding gender expressed in physical form as a man or a woman, based on the law of gender, when one man or one woman sees another man or one woman and they feel connected to them and they feel like that's their soulmate or they met them before, it's not that that man or woman is your soulmate or that there's anything special. What you're feeling, it's just the fact that you're from the same source. The only difference is the varying degree. Because the source itself expresses itself in different forms based on the degree of existence. If some degree of thought form of yours is similar to them, you will feel that connection. It doesn't mean that's the finality of qualification as to whether things will work between you two. And it definitely doesn't mean there's something special between you two. But it does mean that you're all the same source, which everyone is. Which is another thing that just makes me curious as to why humans do certain things some ways. Which shows most people really don't comprehend what they are about. Remember, everything is about the varying degree of stage of expression. And you can always consecrate yourself. The complete 40-minute video is posted on the Patreon page. Take care. Best of luck.